probably a good time to plug the other members, because I think it's been almost a unanimous board all the way along getting us into JDAI, the DMC, and funding alternatives. So why don't you put a plug in for your fellow commissioners?
You know, I really truly believe that our board is very concerned with outcomes for kids overall and with doing the best work for our county. And yes, you're right, unanimously we determined early on to begin this investigation and to work to understand the specific data within our community. You see the board resolution, and this was back in 2005, the end of 2005, when Ramsey County voted to support a partnership with Annie E. Casey for the purpose of reducing disproportionate minority confinement. As I said, that is really what drove us. And we understood and were determined that we could, in fact, if we understood what was going on in our county, effectively create the alternatives that young people needed in order to be able to grow and be productive citizens within our community. If, in fact, the offenses that they created were not egregious or violent crimes, then we felt that we could find opportunities for them. And we have developed that support with the county board over time, so that now we have gone through the juvenile detention alternatives process, determining the reasons for detaining young people. That is, if they won't show up for court, or if in fact they might recommit an offense. We've put in place a risk assessment instrument, working with a large number of partners throughout Ramsey County and in our community. And we're now determining which of those youngsters should be in detention and which should not. And we now have alternatives, both system alternatives, that is within corrections within Ramsey County, as well as alternatives working with our partners in the community. And we've maintained the majority of our board support throughout this process and are looking very forward to the work.
Jim, perhaps you could, just for the benefit of those who didn't see the first show, explain why it's so important to have juvenile detention alternatives.
I think, one, because the outcomes for kids are worse when you use detention. When children start going into secure detention, their outcomes become decidedly worse. Their lifetime outcomes, job expectations, education, even their view of themselves. I mean, children or young people act consistent with the future they see for themselves. And if this becomes the future they see, they act according to that future. And they undersell themselves and they underachieve consistently and chronically.
And this is based on research?
This is based on research, on national research, which started the initiative at the foundation. And then it was sort of a, how do you counteract this? And the way you do it is by using your detention center in a very narrow way to protect public safety for kids who cannot be released outright or cannot be released with some level of supervision and who are a threat to commit another offense or not show up to court. And we devised a strategy that helps jurisdictions work through this process so the right kid is in detention. The kid who could be a threat to public safety is there, as well he or she should be, as opposed to just sort of locking up kids en masse and hoping for better results.
And Michael, maybe you could explain to our viewers what some of these alternatives are.
Well, we have two basic sets of alternatives. We have our 36-hour pre-detention hearing alternatives, and these are for kids who are brought to the detention center. And I want to say that detention center is our maximum security jail for youth who have been accused of an offense. Okay.
It would be like the adult law enforcement center that
Correct.
where they go and wait for court disposition. Correct.
So we have two sets of alternatives at that particular point. One is shelter care, which is a safe place for kids to be who can't go home for some reason or another. And there are a variety of reasons why youth brought to the detention center cannot go home. So there's shelter, and I'm just...
home confinement.
Yes, I thank you very much. And then we have home detention or home arrest or home confinement. And this is where kids will be sent back home, and we have a probation staff or court staff who monitors them being in home and following the rules of home until they can get in front of a judge and be brought back to court. So those are our pre-detention alternatives. And now, through the generous support of the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners, we have funded 2 types of post-adjudication or how do we say this, alternatives for kids once they're into our juvenile system, once they've seen a judge and are on probation. We have community coaches, which are basically mentors, and we also have our evening learning centers, which are after-school programs, culturally based, community seated, and are a collaboration of community organizations such as Model Cities, 180 Degrees, and the Cultural Wellness Center, and the YWCA. So those are the 2 basic types of alternatives.
Now, those are alternatives that we've developed working with a broad-based organization that we've called our stakeholders. But we still have the Boys Totem Town. We still have the work programs, the 7 to 11, 7 days if they're good, 11 days if they're not good, they do the full 11. There's the 14-21 and the 30-45.
Now,
We still have those.
Gary, let me just interrupt you there. The viewers don't know what you're talking about when you
That's
say
what we have you there for.
Well, I think Michael should explain it since it's at his facility.
Well, to me, those wouldn't be considered alternatives. Those are some specific corrections programs that we have for kids who've gone through the court process, and we've tried to get these programs. One is a work program, and if kids do X number of days and they're good, then they get to go home. But if they're not good, if they don't follow the rules, then they stay longer. These are corrections, kind of our traditional corrections services, but they're basically focused towards addressing some of the youth's needs and trying to get them to understand that they need to turn their behavior around. But these are not considered alternatives to detention. These are really post-adjudication services for youth.
But the point that you have with your explanation is that there are some kids that won't get into an alternative. They're going to be going through a normal correctional consequence.
That's absolutely true.
They may have a correctional consequence if they're in an alternative, if that's what the sentence or disposition is. So we haven't given up the entire juvenile system. We've in fact tweaked it to try to make sure that the kids that we need to be protected from by public safety or have shown a history of not showing up for court, that we make sure they're there so we can take care of their case and get them into either a correctional consequence or into some sort of consequence. If they're on drugs, we get them into treatment. If they have mental health issues, we get treatment. If they just need other consequences. And that's, Sarah, that's where you're some of your expertise right now as the COO of Project 180 Degrees or 180 Degrees. Go ahead.
Yes, well, we're currently operating in partnership with the Cultural Wellness Center and the YWCA. We're operating one of the evening learning centers. It's been up and running for about 3 months now. And so the purpose of the program is it's a 30-day program for kids on probation, and it's supposed to serve as an alternative. When kids in the past would disobey a probation rule, they would end up often going back to detention as a short-term consequence. And that consequence didn't necessarily address the underlying issue, and detention wasn't necessarily the best place for that youth. So instead now the youth are referred to our program for 30 days, and we offer services. We pick the kids up and we drive them home. They're there with us from 3:30 till 8:30 p.m., and we also provide them with dinner, and we provide intensive programming for those youth, with the goal of keeping them out of the system and preventing probation violations, which were a driving force of the detention population numbers being high.
So what do you actually do during that time, or what do they do?
Well, we have a schedule, and so every day we have a different subject matter to address in the schedule. But so like one day we do all life skills, one day we do employment readiness. We have community elders come in and speak to the youth. We also have family day, and sort of community day. So we also believe that we also need to create relationships with the family members, because we know that when a youth is having trouble, it's often an entire family system that's involved with that trouble. So we want to engage the family to